and welcome to On Air. I'm Klara Syrewicz, and this week we're taking a peek into your bedrooms, following in the footsteps of Europe's politicians who seem particularly eager to tell you what you should and shouldn't be doing in there. Later in the show, we'll boldly approach the news window from which several men have mysteriously plunged to their deaths, and we'll investigate what happens when you're no longer your president's favorite. Now, let's talk about Europe's fertility rate. It's the lowest in the world. For a population to replace itself, each woman needs to have 2.1 children. And no, 2 kids and a cat don't cut it. In almost every demographic statistic, Italy is an outlier. The country is on track to hit a new record low for births, according to the National Statistical Bureau, which published the data on Monday. Italian women refuse to have children, to the great despair of Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni, whose nationalistic government perceives birth rates, as did Benito Mussolini, to be a symbol of patriotic vigour. With her emphasis on traditional family values, economic measures are not the answer. Cultural change is required too. For that, she's appointed an anti-abortion minister for family, and one of her most controversial moves came on October 16th, when Italy passed Europe's most restrictive law on surrogacy, equating it with terrorism and genocide. Hopeful parents can now be prosecuted if they are involved in surrogacy in the country and abroad. Penalties range from 3 months to 2 years in prison. That's a chunk of the population that won't have kids. I'm not sure how that's supposed to help, but OK. So what shall we do to boost birth rates, according to Giorgia Meloni, or for that matter, Viktor Orban or Robert Fico? Send women home, gorge them with the valour of traditional families, order them to have more kids, throw in some cash incentives, and maybe make their access to contraception and abortion more difficult. OK, done. And it's not working. Why? If falling birth rates are the result of greater female participation in the workplace as well as increased access to contraception, they are in fact the price of prosperity. According to the UN, more working women make for growing economies. To quote the macroeconomist Philip Pilkington, as wealth in a country increases, its birth rate falls as surely as night follows day. The reverse is also true. If you want women to have lots of children, stay home and care for them, your country will be significantly poorer and will lag developmentally. It's a paradox that one of the most significantly leveraging drivers for birth rates has been the promotion of equal opportunities between men and women and encouraging flexible work arrangements as ways of helping more women into the labour market. Let me explain that in more detail by showing you what doesn't work in Italy, and I'm not referring to gluten-free diets. Let's put ourselves in the shoes of Giulia, a hypothetical 27-year-old Italian woman who is thinking of settling down and having kids. Let's assume Giulia has a male partner, because if she had a female partner and wanted to have kids, that would be a no. Meloni has essentially banned same-sex couples from legally raising children together. Those kids would be demographically inappropriate, just like the kids born to surrogates. OK, so there is now another group of people put off from having children. Anyway, let's go back to Giulia. She's looking for a male partner. Tough luck, Giulia. There are more single women than men, and most of those men are by now, on average, less educated than the women. Another factor when looking for a life partner. Would Giulia consider having a child alone? After all, Meloni is a single mother. Single parents constitute nearly 20% of households in the EU, and in the overwhelming majority of cases, these are women with socio-economic conditions considerably worse than that of single fathers. Italy is the only country where real wages have declined in the last 30 years, and with meagre salaries, most aspiring parents would both have to work. But only 51% of women in Italy are employed, compared with more than 70% in Germany and in the UK, or 68% in France. An astonishing 70.5% of 18 to 34-year-old Italians are still living with their parents. An effective contraceptive, if you ask me. So Giulia risks a lot if she has a child, and even more if she is left to care for it alone. In Italy, nearly 50% of marriages end in divorce. In light of that, Giorgia Meloni has just cut the VAT tax on diapers, and they are now 50% cheaper. Wow, that's a game changer there. Let's move on to another safe haven of traditional family values. No, not J.D. Vance's head, but closer. Slovakia. Slovakia has been giving the EU a headache lately. It has so far evaded financial hand-slapping over the rule of law, media freedom and corruption. But Slovakia has major lapses on all these counts, a political landscape mired by levels of violence quite outstanding in this corner of the world. And in the middle of all this stands this man, Robert Fico. As the founder of the Smer Social Democracy Party, which first took office in 2006, Fico was elected Prime Minister this year for a fourth term. His political career has been dogged by corruption scandals, most notably following the murder of journalist Jan Kuciak, who exposed links between the Prime Minister's party and organised crime. Fico himself was charged with running an organised crime group within the government. Yet because Fico had immunity as an MP, he was not prosecuted. He is now the longest-serving politician in Slovakia's history. This year, he presided over the systematic dismantling of corruption-fighting institutions to help out political cronies. With so many ugly things to hide, Fico understandably hates journalists.
You're obsessed with the devil, even from the SME and Actuality newspaper. When you see us normally, I think you'll start dancing, what is it called? Haka dance? So that you can tell yourself that what we will do with them.
But it's testament to his resilience and sheer luck that he is still doing the haka dance himself. An assassination attempt earlier this year left him fighting for his life. From it, he emerged seemingly more determined to waltz around every possible corner in the EU, in NATO, in Ukraine and in Russia. Let's look at how he does it. We've been talking a lot about family, so we'll stay on message. Imagine this time having a big extended clan. Some of your relatives don't like each other and each expects you to come over for Christmas. Oh no, what now? It's simple. Ask Robert Fico. His answer might run something like this. Meet with Auntie Ukraine and tell her you love her. You have to. She's paying you lots of money for electricity and for howitzers and artillery rounds. You're profiting like crazy from the conflict there, even though you oppose other countries sending her any arms. Then meet with your mom and dad in the EU, shake your head sadly and tell them Auntie Ukraine is clearly deluded. She's going to have to part with her territory. She's responsible for her own problems and you're doing your best to support her. Just look how you're helping her get funds for the construction of a better electrical grid that would conveniently link to you. Get lots of money from mum and dad in EU funds by obscuring your total mess with the rule of law. Distribute said funds to your mates and some nude model/personal assistant with links to the Calabrian mafia. Then back at your place, announce that you think mum and dad are like so annoying and you need your independence and you'll be going to Uncle Vanya in Russia for Christmas because you owe him like for World War II. And oh, incidentally, he's still keeping you hooked on his gas and petrol. You didn't wean yourself off of it, but like you had no time for that. And what do you mean others did? That, in a nutshell, is how Robert Fico spent last week. He met with Ukrainian Prime Minister Denis Shmyhal and told him he would be delighted to welcome Ukraine into the EU, knowing perfectly well that assuming the war eventually ends, it would take decades and there'd be no guarantees in the accession process. He then went to the EU Council meeting, but before, in a TV interview, he said Ukraine could never join NATO. Finally, to cajole his pro-Russian electorate, he then promised to attend Victory Day in Moscow, which will be, as you can guess, the most nauseating pro-war meat-fest imaginable. But Fico is also eager to please the EU. A staggering 80% of Slovakia's public investments come from EU funds. Any interruption in this stream would be a major blow to the country and its large budget deficit. The government has just imposed spending cuts and big tax hikes, including on books, because, and I'm quoting, those are for rich people anyway. By now, I hope that those of you who are married with children feel successful and those who own books wealthy. State-ordered extrajudicial killings are as old as politics itself, but their incidence may be rising, with states using lethal violence inside and outside their borders more brazenly. New technologies make it easier for governments to strike their enemies, even from great distances, and rising international powers like India or Saudi Arabia are eager to project their force abroad. You can learn more about that in our report.
One of the most infamous modern examples of political assassination attempts is the poisoning of Sergei Skripal, a former Russian intelligence officer turned British double agent. In March 2018, Skripal and his daughter, Yulia, were poisoned in Salisbury, England. An inquiry into the subsequent death of Dawn Sturgis, an innocent bystander, began on Monday, October 14th. Skripal, through his attorney, gave a statement as a witness.
I believe that Putin makes all important decisions himself. Therefore, I believe that he must have at least given his consent to attack Yulia and me. Any GRU commander making such a decision without Putin's approval would be severely punished.
Russian spies were, allegedly, behind the poisoning, having smeared the nerve agent on Skripal's door handle. Russia has continued in the ways of its de facto predecessor, the Soviet Union, targeting dissidents and perceived enemies both at home and abroad. Alexander Litvinenko, a former Russian intelligence agent, was poisoned in London in 2006 with the radioactive substance polonium-210.
My husband was killed by agents of the Russian state in the first ever act of nuclear terrorism.
More recently, Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny, one of Putin's most outspoken critics, died in February 2024 at a penal colony in the Ural Mountains. Navalny had previously survived a poisoning attempt in 2020, which Western intelligence agencies attributed to Russian state actors. Historically, Israel has also been known to carry out targeted assassinations, as exemplified by the events surrounding the Munich Olympics massacre. The Israeli government authorized its foreign intelligence service, the Mossad, to track down and kill anyone who had played a role in the terrorist attack carried out by 8 members of the Palestinian militant organization Black September. More recently, the Mossad has targeted Iranian nuclear scientists seeking to hinder Iran's nuclear program. The assassination of Mohsen Fakhrizadeh, a top Iranian nuclear scientist, is a prime example. Reportedly, a computer-controlled machine gun was used, allowing the assassination to be carried out remotely, without injuring any bystanders, including Fakhrizadeh's wife, who was with him at the time. Saudi Arabia also employed this tactic in 2018 when it slaughtered Jamal Khashoggi, a Saudi journalist and critic of the government in Riyadh, inside the country's consulate in Istanbul.
The execution of Mr. Khashoggi was a state execution. It is not, as they try to pretend, a rogue operation or a mistake. It's a state killing.
Hardeep Singh Nijjar, a Canadian Sikh activist advocating for an independent Sikh state, was shot and killed outside a Sikh temple in Surrey, British Columbia. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau later accused the Indian government of being involved in the assassination, causing a major diplomatic crisis between the two countries. Whether through poison, covert agents, or advanced technology, these acts reveal a disturbing willingness by states to bypass legal procedures and international norms in pursuit of their aims.
Welcome back. We have Mateusz Mazzini with us.
Absolute pleasure.
Hello. We are going to talk about state-sponsored assassinations, and regrettably, they seem to be on the rise. Just last week, US prosecutors charged a senior Islamic Revolutionary Guard with plotting to assassinate a human rights activist on US soil. A week before that, those same prosecutors charged an Indian intelligence officer who tried to kill a political activist also in New York. A similar operation was successfully carried out in Canada. We know about the big diplomatic spat that has caused. So I get the feeling that we are seeing a multiplication of these situations, of these events. Do you agree?
Well, I'm not entirely sure they're actually multiplying, because there's another side to this. Perhaps we just learn about them. Maybe they've been around in equal frequencies for quite some time, and we just learn more efficiently about the results of it. And that actually, I guess, leads us to the question, how do you define a successful politically motivated assassination sponsored by a sovereign state? Because right now there's a clear tendency in that realm to make it very public. So once you carry out a certain hit, everybody's supposed to know about that. But it might always be the case that it's not just about a certain phenomenon, whether that's state-sponsored terrorism or any other activity within the criminal realm, that doesn't necessarily increase its own frequency per se. Maybe we, as the public opinion, are actually just better informed, and that isn't necessarily a bad thing, maybe.
Israel has traditionally flaunted its extrajudicial killings of Nazi criminals and terrorists because it was a way of trying to deter these actors. But lately, they have taken it to an entire new level. You know, how would you call what Israel has been doing recently? Is it still extrajudicial targeted assassinations, or are these just acts of war with another state, namely Iran?
Well, I think it's both, depending on which case study we're talking about. Obviously, we can shed some more light into the case study of the famous pager attack, which, for all intents and purposes, was an impressive international effort. I mean, creating a fake company in Hungary, if I'm not mistaken, that then produces electronic equipment in Taiwan, and after years of that very painstaking building of your position, of your marketing, perhaps even, I guess, you carry out an attack that, from the Israeli point of view, has been largely a success. And obviously, other things that the IDF is doing on different front lines, whether that's Gaza, whether that's southern Lebanon right now, has a much larger number of civilian killings, much greater scope of collateral damage, and that doesn't necessarily, or let's be straightforward about that, doesn't fall into that definition of targeted killings at all. But I think that the Israelis can still brag about being the global leader in carrying out state-sponsored assassinations.
An interesting case is actually Russia, because we recently counted that about 62 close Putin collaborators.
Quite a number.
I think that's an underestimate, actually. Met an untimely death in bizarre circumstances. Usually they fall out of windows. And these opponents are killed mostly at home in Russia. And when Putin decides to kill his opponents abroad, he uses nerve agents, something that only a state can provide, really. It's a kind of very public type of assassination. So what surprises me is the relative shyness that is in those purges, those killings that happen within Russia. They are staged to look like a suicide or something else, while those killings abroad are definitely more, there's more bravado, there's
more flashy.
Show. They're more flashy, exactly. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think that raises a number of questions. So first and foremost, if I was a construction inspector in Russia, I would have serious doubts about the quality of windows all over that country, because there's clearly here a tendency of people falling out of windows, finding themselves in precarious situations in and around windows. Well, there's that very famous British saying that all politics is domestic politics. So we know that these killings, whether they take place in a different country or domestically, they're always inward oriented. They're supposed to trigger a certain result at home. But we, as you rightly pointed out, we see a clear distinction. Those who decided to remain in Russia are given this window treatment. Those who are exiled are usually targeted and then killed as a result through way more sophisticated method.
I think that Russia is actually trying to, as you said earlier, make a point. So those killings abroad are meant to be very public. They are meant to send a message also to the country where they are executed, and that message being, we can do whatever we like.
It's the international rules-based order. It's based on rules, but it's not necessarily enforceable. So we struggle as the international community to go after the perpetrators. And you, again, rightly pointed out, they usually carried out with a splash, right? So it's not just about, I think, the individual case, but also it's an advertising campaign, right? It's supposed to advertise our capabilities as a country that carries out this kind of assassination. And also, just bluntly, it's almost like buying a billboard along a highway and saying, we can get you. Don't forget,
Oh, what a lovely way to do that.
Well,
Thank
I
you.
mean, it means certify an end, I guess.
Thank you, Mateusz.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
You. And thank you for joining us this evening. Be sure to tune in next week when we will talk about spies prowling the Baltic and the North Seas. See you soon.